So hello everyone. Okay, this works. I'm so happy to be here at the last part of the conference. So welcome everyone. My name is Evelyne. I traveled from Belgium. I also live at a nice city next to a river. It's a few degrees warmer there, but not that much. So from bricks to bytes. This is going to be a personal story. I graduated high school in 2005. And then I left to go study in a medieval castle, and I went to study engineering and architecture. Our campus, the medieval castle, one of the big reasons also to go there, it was lovely. And we ran around there for 5 years. We worked there, we ran around on our socks. We just ordered pizzas from there, which was always fun because you could see the guy on the scooter just going around until somebody opened the big stuffy wooden door. But we lived there. We lived there because we were working all-nighters. We had a lot of technical studies and very, very, very long hours, but mostly architectural studios, which took everything out of us. We had the top architects of Belgium who were our mentors, and they prepared us for the hard job and the long hours of an architect. But then something happened. In my last year, when I was on my way to my midterm review of my master thesis. I was on the road on my bicycle. I traveled on my bicycle everywhere. It's what most students did. I was mumbling the words of my midterm review, and I need to say this, I need to say that, I say that. And from suddenly there was a bus just crossing the roads from where I was. I could feel my body going over the handlebars. I was braking. I was trying everything that I could. I felt my body fly over, and the last thing that I remember were just the tires from the bus passing my face at 10 centimeters, something. I was very lucky to be alive. I stood up. I cleaned some of the blood away. I went to the midterm review because I really wanted to do that. I did well, but then my promoter sent me to the hospital with a few broken bones and a serious concussion. I was lucky to be alive. But from that day on, I had migraines attack almost daily. So the blow on my head was so severe that it just kept on coming back. I had one migraine attack, I would stay 2 days, 3 days in bed, but then a day later there would be a new migraine attack. And the doctors couldn't reverse the damage that was done. So they said okay, try to get your degree, which I did, and then take 6 months, take a year just to recover and to get better from that accident. It was a very hard blow. So I did, I graduated. I took 6 months of rest, which was I hate not doing stuff, but I was sick. I spent it in bed most of the day. Those 6 months became 1 year, and that 1 year became 4. Nobody could find what was wrong with me. I went from one treatment to another treatment. I did some temporal jobs in between, but I could not work as an architect. I could not start off as a junior architect in the first year, because that would mean long hours, that would mean a lot of responsibilities that I didn't know if I could handle those. It was hard. I felt so weak. It was such a difficult time. I had worked and I had studied all my life to do nothing. But then I wouldn't be standing here if this story wouldn't have a happy ending. So, by a hazard, I just met someone. I went to the wedding of my first roommate, and everyone's life was moving on and mine was just standing still. And I was hiding out in a cloakroom for a while because I had, of course, a migraine attack coming on. And there was this co-student of mine, and she went in and she saw what was happening, although I was trying to hide. She said oh, my father, he tries to help out hopeless cases. Maybe you could try to get an appointment with him. And at that point in time, I would have tried everything. I would have danced around fires. I would have gone to magnetic doctors. I would have tried everything. And it worked. He was the one who found that there was a blockage on my arteries. So there was a blockage on my arteries going to my head, which then gave a big difference in pressure. But they could do surgery. And so I needed to have 2 operations. I had a first one. I felt much better. Like my life changed completely from one day to another. I could have a future again. I could plan. I could do things. And so I had the second operation. I was thinking like, okay, how am I going to start living again? After 4 years of mostly seeing doctors and spending it in my bed, how am I going to give color to my life? And so I was in a hospital bed recovering after the second operation, and I got an email. About an information session on how to become a mobile developer. I said, that's interesting, because as a kid I was always wanting to do IT. I lived in the golden ages of Tomb Raider. That's most of you probably know. And my strategy was first kill all the enemies, kill all the scary things, and then just enjoy walking around and exploring the nice views. And then I think it was Tomb Raider 5 that had a level maker. I spent hours on that, just making that. So I really wanted to become a game designer, just designing those worlds. Of course, my parents said, like, what is that? That's not a real job. What are you going to do? And nothing like this existed at that time. But now it was like, okay, mobile developer, that seems nice. It's like it was in the times that applications were everywhere. It seemed possible that I could do it. I had a little basics in my engineering part of my degree. I had the basics of programming. So I thought like, okay, maybe this is possible. I enrolled in the course and I got my first job as a full stack developer in a big consultancy firm. So I tried. I studied every night. I felt that I lacked the hard skills that people here have all studied 4 or 5 or more years to get it. And I was there with like a basics and a course, but of course I needed to study up on my programming languages, on all the frameworks, on the SQL, on cloud, and on everything else that was asked by the client. But finally, when I dared when I managed to do the effort and get a little further on, I was talking to the client, I was working in a team, I was working on projects, and I started to see resemblances. I started to see similarities between architecture and between developing. I saw some skills that were transferable, some skills that could help me with this. It's like building software. It's also a project. It's like you're building something from nothing. You're starting with nothing. It's a client has a question and you get there. It doesn't mean just writing code. It means coming up with creative solutions far before there's one letter of code written down. It's building software is also, it's not only a craft, not only a skill, but it is a craft. It is something that is also best learned by mentors and by different people, by code reviews. It's the way that you learn the best, just like architecture. Like there are best practices in place, but everyone has their own coding style. There's this freedom that everybody has their way of doing this. There is a common ground in the way that we think about design between developers and between architects. I realize that being a developer is so much more than just those hard skills. So let's look at an architecture project. This is a Kronplatz mountain in Switzerland, in the Alps, and they wanted a museum right on top of the mountain. It would be a museum about mountaineering. It would be about the triumphs and the tragedies of people trying to climb the famous peaks. They asked Zaha Hadid, one of the famous architects from the last century, to design the museum. So, okay, they made up a plan, an analysis. This is a section of the building. Here will be the mountain. And a further and deeper analysis of the structure. This is how the concrete slabs work and how the stability is going to be made up. And then construction could start. And people would get to work. And this is a teamwork. This is also where a big part of the problem solving comes into place. Because believe me, they will run into a problem every step of the way and will have to fix it. This is also where you can see that same mindset going to work, that same like, okay, we need to achieve this project, we have deadlines, we need to work in iterations, and you see a whole team going for the same goal. One of the articles that always resonated with me was that architecture is always building a prototype. It's you're always trying to solve a problem in a way that was never done before. So you always have to figure out new things, and it drives innovation, and you've never done this before, so it's untested. It takes more time, but the reward is so big. So this is a finalized building. This is the entrance and one of the terraces, all in those big concrete slabs. The interior of the museum in a darker gray, just like the coal mines that were underneath it. I left out a big part of the process. I left out a part where architecture makes architecture. I left out a part where this guy, Messner, was studied. So it is a Messner museum. And this guy is the first person to climb all 14 mountains higher than 8,000 meters. He was the first person to climb Mount Everest without additional oxygen. The whole team of Zaha Hadid, they went to visit that mountain peak. They took an initiation in climbing just to see what it was all about and who they were building for. You see here Zaha Hadid with her team on the floor, like drawing out plans and like trying out different ways, because it would be possible to get into the museum by climbing and by going into the caves and then also finding another entrance. These were the first models made, and these were the first models where they looked for ways to make it better and to see if it would work, if it would not work. This was something that I missed in my first projects. I missed the end users. I missed like, okay, who are we designing for? What is this business that I am working in? Like I was making applications for different industries, but like what are they doing? How is that work there? And I thought like, okay, maybe I can try to do that. Maybe there's something there. Maybe I can get out of my box and just try to see if we could do something more before starting to develop. And my colleagues said like, oh, but that's user experience design. And I was like, user experience, what? But so I got into this, at that time, pretty new field that it was common in industries. I got into UX design and I started to learn from it. I started to go with that other one colleague in the whole firm at that time. It was just one. And he took me under his wings, and like we managed to get into the factories, managed to get factory visits to see who we were designing for. We got together, we made prototypes, we made wireframes together with the client, together with the end users, and we got them around the table. We developed prototypes that could be tested out at that time. And you could see that the process of architecture, where you have the functional design, the aesthetic design, it also works looped. It's kind of the same with user experience design and design of your application. It works in the same way, where you iterate over your designs and you always validate them. So I set out to be a UX designer, and part UX designer, part developer. And I try to put the user experience design approach with all my clients, but of course, with different successes. Like the struggle is real. I don't know if you know this feeling. So next up, I have this example. Does somebody already know which building this is? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the Sagrada Familia. So the first drawings were from 1866. They started construction in 1882. There were, I think, at least 6 architects involved. This is how it is now. It is still not ready. Now, why am I showing you the Sagrada Familia? I think it's because one of the longest agile projects running. Like, I don't know which iteration, but the model and the designs have changed. It started as a completely Gothic church, and now, well, I don't know which style you can call this anymore. It has a little bit of the whole history involved, which is lovely. And at the same time, it's just open for public. I would really recommend it now because they added lighting to the towers, and it's beautiful. So let's look at some other aspects that are really transferable from building to development. This is Centre Pompidou in Paris, also museum. And you could look at the stability. We would map out the stability, how things stand, and how it works, and like what are the foundations that we're building on. As another example, I have the Microsoft Teams. Also has a whole mapped out stability. It is even called architecture. So also in the naming, there's a lot of architecture there. Next up, let's look at circulation. Circulation is something that needs a lot of attention, needs a lot of designing, because this will determine the flow of people. This will determine how they go from one room to another, how rooms are connected, and how they will flow, how they will find some rooms, how they will experience this whole building. That is something that in development also should have that same attention. It's like, how will users flow through your site? How will they flow through their processes? You could do it with a kind of a navigation structure that later translates into your wireframes, into your prototype, and should be tested out. Security. There are psychological ways and there are physical barriers that are needed to keep people in or keep people out. And, like, you know, security in websites also have a whole architecture thought out. Even building physics. Like, you could see this is how we would model a building, and to see how the heat and the cold relate to each other, how we can make them more energy sufficient. It's a whole study to look if we need extra insulation or we need other design choices, which of course gets to be more and more important every day now. And every conference that I go to, like in the last years, I see that now we have a lot of talks about the carbon emission of software as well. Here's a little graph of the most sustainable or video messaging app out there. And Microsoft has a whole plan to go to net zero as well. So I try to look at an application like it is a physical building. I try to look at it like, okay, I come into the application. This is my landing page. This is my entry hall. The living room would be where I do my main task, or a kitchen is where like all the dirty work happens and the settings and stuff happens. It helps me to kind of check if it works, if people move into a digital building as well as they would in a physical building. So my first project, a client, was a company that assists and did company visits for prevention. And it had a somewhat technical depth. Somewhat is maybe putting it diplomatic. It was a dinosaur. It was 12 years old. It's still alive. But okay, we couldn't convince the client to migrate software, to do a rewrite. So okay, so we went to work on the dinosaur, and at one time, our software was building. Took 8 minutes, and we were at the coffee machine, as one does. And we were talking with this other nice lady, and she comes in and she makes this elaborate coffee with an AeroPress, and then she starts cutting up vegetables, starts cutting up fruit. We already go back to work. We come back half an hour later, and we start talking, and she says like, oh yeah, I'm just waiting for my program to start up. And we're like, oh. She says, oh yeah, I work with that program, that application. I was like, that's our dinosaur. Turns out that every morning when she starts work, she turns on her computer, she opens the web application, and she has to wait for at least 35 to 40 minutes before she even sees a screen. So really, bless that person, she never complained, she never went to the help desk. That's why we didn't know, because we did load testing, we did everything, but apparently she was one of the only users that had to load in a data set for over 80,000 records, which then ran into problems. But it was at that time that I realized that that poor lady, she had to work with that application for 8 hours a day, every day. Now, we're mostly, in our consultancy firm, we're mostly making software for people at a work environment. So we're making software to help people do their job, to do less of the repetitive tasks, and to focus more on the things that they really want to do. So if we're really making things for people for 8 hours a day to work in, then that should get the attention that it deserves. So now let's just look at screen time for the whole world. Like, how many time do you think that people spend on a screen? So 0 to 2 hours every day, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8. Well, right now we're at 6 hours and 58 minutes worldwide. So even young adults at this moment, they have 4 hours of smartphone use only. In South Africa, they're already at 11 hours, and Generation Z averages around 9 hours a day already now. I also have the statistic that almost half of the 0 to 2-year-olds interact with smartphones, so it's not looking good in the future. Also, there's no statistics for IT people, because at this point you could ask, like, okay, why do we even care about architecture? They're spending it on their computers anyway. So let's do a little history lesson. So first you had the cavemen, they had a cave to put their stuff, do a little drawing. Same, we had our computers in the family house, so let's look at family computers. You could do your documents on there. It was a place to store your documents, to do a little paint drawing. Then later became the settlers. You started farming. You started to use the land to work on. You started to make the land work for you and provide food and shelter. Then was the big rise of Excel software, and that revolutionized the workplace. A computer became the most important part of a desk. It became the part where you needed to do your job. It was there for productivity. Then next up, from all the farms, they started to make cities. And the cities would be from one place to another, they would connect. Because when a farmer, somewhere here, he would work on his land, but he would have a surplus, and he would try to sell that to other people. And then he needed to walk 6 kilometers to the market, where he could sell his stuff, and walk back to his farm. So that is the great invention of cities and of roads. Let's try to connect all the computers together, and we have the rise of the internet, which further changed everything a lot. Of course, there were some bombings. There was also the Anna Kournikova virus, for those who still remember that. So security, kind of important. This is the way that we went to bars, went to cafes, we started drinking together, started to have a social life. This has, for a big part, moved on to our phones. Sending messages, just looking where someone is. And then there is a public space. There was a time that you needed to go to the store, you needed to go to the bank to get out some gold, you needed to go to the city center to get your documents and to fill in your taxes. Well, none of that. You can just do that from your computer right now. We have evolved in this place because the part on the left, I'm talking about thousands of years, the part in development and in how the computer has taken over our life and has taken over even the physical space. I'm talking about 40 years. It's right now that maybe you don't need any public buildings anymore. Banks are closing down. Here in Sweden, try to find a cash machine, which I love, by the way. But it is kind of scary to see that buildings are disappearing because of software. So this apartment, it looks really nice, right? It has like all the right forms if you like this minimalistic style. But let's say that it kind of misses a somewhat soul. Like, you design a house for a specific family. You get to know them. Like if you design a house, you need to know that they need a big kitchen because someone is a hobby cook. Do they need a piano in the living room? Do they have a son that is a drummer, and are you going to put him in the garage, or are you just going to put him somewhere in the garden, his own house? It's this kind of thing that really says like, okay, how can you build an application if you don't know for who you're building it? It's just like a house, just like a building. You need to know who you're building for. You need to know how they live and how they would like that. Right now, we're building big applications, and look at Microsoft, how all their different applications are working together, and how the whole Office suite and the Outlook, and even in developer tools. Like there are so many different tools, and they're starting to weave into one big ecosystem. If you translate that into architecture, you get into urban design. And then there's this one project that I really like because it fascinates me. We went there on a visit during the architecture studies, and it was a city in the Netherlands, Nieuwegein. They needed more place in Amsterdam. Amsterdam was full, and they said, like, okay, but let's try to keep a little bit of the nature instead of just expanding the city. So we're going to make a city 20 kilometers further. Completely no city, there was nothing there. So they designed it, they started building it, it had stores, it had apartments, it had family houses, it had everything. Just no people. Like those people are photoshopped on there. That's one of the models. There was no one. It was scary. It's a little bit like build a city and they will come. They don't. So city is grown organically. On the right side, you see a part of Antwerp. And it was one of the first projects that they did with citizen participation. They did huge workshops with everybody that everybody that lived and worked there. And they tried to look like, okay, what kind of infrastructure do you need? Do you need more houses? And they said, like, no, we need a park. And so they started with building a park. And from that park on, they did new workshops. But they tried to do it gradually and more organically, just like a city would grow so many years ago. It's a little bit this. I'm a very big advocate of human-centered design because this is who we're doing it for. Technology can do it all. So we know if we get an analysis document, we will make it. You can start with all your objects and things, but it's about the people. It is who that you're doing it for. You're doing it with people. You're developing together with a team for other people. So I really want to talk about this book. There was this colleague of mine, and he said, like, oh, you've done architecture, so you must know Christopher Alexander. And I must admit, I received this book when I was starting architecture because it is the design equivalent of the Bible. But I almost never opened it because it doesn't have a lot of pictures, and new architecture books do. So this is a pattern language by Christopher Alexander. He's a professor at Berkeley from architecture. It was written in 1977. But even though it has this age, it is still #1 on the Amazon bestsellers architecture critics book. Now, this book means a lot in the architectural community, but some colleagues of him from the computer science department said, like, this is interesting. Let's see what principles we can take into development, and let's see what that means. And I think that the book derived from this book is a book that most of you would know and maybe also have on your shelves, opened or unopened. But that's this book. It is one of the standard works about object-oriented programming by the Gang of Four. But let's go back to the original and not the cover. This book is a sum of 253 patterns. Now, what is a pattern? It is a way that the physical world responds to human interaction. It is mainly about improving people's well-being and improving their interactions with the world and with each other. It's not really solutions in form, but more solutions in making you think why, telling you different patterns in people's behaviors and in societies, what happens there. Actually, it kind of sounds fluffy or maybe really heavy when I talk to it this way, but it is a really nice read. It is named by one of the New York Times book critics, one of the calmest books I have ever read. So let's look at some of the patterns. I like to start with pattern 253, the last one, the things from your life. So there is different scales in this. It goes from whole neighborhoods to the size of your cupboard. And this one goes on that you have decor and everything that you would hang on your walls. It should reflect this moment of your life. When right now you walk into an IKEA here, you walk into any IKEA over the whole world, and you find all of these paintings that people, as Christopher Alexander says, will buy just because they think that it would please someone who comes to visit you. But it's nothing personal, it's nothing from you. So I went to look up for digital references, and I went to look up 4 car manufacturers all over the world. And when you look at their homepage, it's just exactly the same. They all look alike. And they make it this way because they think it's what people expect to see. It's good. It's like another car website works like this and they have good sales, so let's try and make exactly the same website. And okay, good. There might be a certain consistency, and consistency is important and is a very good tool in UX efficiency because people expect things. But here you're trying to sell a product, and by doing it this way, it will lose all its uniqueness. And that is something that we need to keep in mind. Another pattern is a farmhouse kitchen. And there they did a study on which rooms of your house is actually used. And so you can see that people spend all of their time in the kitchen, in the living room, a little behind a piano, a lot on the bathroom. But look at the dining room untouched. Why do you have all the space if it's never used? So Christopher Alexander says, just open up the kitchen. It is an old idea anyway from when people had servants and like their workspace was completely separated from the living space of the people. Just open up your kitchen, put your sofa in the kitchen and let your children play there as well. The Norman Nielsen Group, one of the famous UX gods, he made also a whole study about eye tracking movements on websites. And so here you can see how a person scans a web page. And this tells you a lot. This tells you on what space is most important and what information people are actually looking for and what noises and maybe some things that are untouched and maybe need less attention on a page. Pattern 112 is the entrance transition. Where in architecture there's this place in between the street outside and your house. There's a porch, there's a doorstep, there is some kind of space that is neither inside, neither outside. It's not public, it's not private, it's semi-private. And this is the place where you would get to meet people that you don't know yet. So like the postman where you need to sign. It will be weird if you step outside of the door. It will be weird if you invite them into your house. But it is this place. It's like where you always would enter a door and you would get into a kind of an entrance hall. It's this space that we as people, we feel safe in. It's also something, why do you make landing screens? And while going through an application, try to look and try to define those different levels of public, semi-public, and private. Also, just to feel safe. It's one of the comparisons that I can make is with a checkout line for something really expensive. It's like you want all those different steps because you're going to spend a lot of money and you want that it's done safely. At last, I really want to say that a pattern is not an isolated entity. So like Christopher Alexander says is, when you're applying patterns to one tiny thing, to your cupboard, try to look at everything that is connected to that. And then further and further use the patterns for your house, for your street, for your neighborhood, till you're bigger and bigger. It's probably, like you all know, you cannot refactor just one thing in your code. You can make an impact on everything around it. It's try to use all those patterns together to get it. So they're also trying to do this in design by implementing design systems. They're trying to look at the tiny patterns that can be reused, trying to look at the patterns that then we can group together into components, and those components can become bigger components. They can make up a part of a page, like cards that come back, and they can make up whole pages, like in templates. Now, one of the things that Christopher Alexander said in one of the works after the pattern language was that he was sometimes scared for what would happen in the computer science. Like that those patterns would maybe have a psychological effect on people, that they would feel limited. That they would say like, okay, maybe they're just going to use the patterns and thinking like, okay, we have patterns, we just use them and that's that. That's of course one, that's not what we want, and that's not fun for designers as well, or for developers as well. We just don't want to make the nicest CRUD application of the world. We want to make something a little more. But then you can look at the fabulous Lego invention. Like these could be your patterns, but making up a whole city, making up the nicest building or the nicest neighborhood there, it's still completely up to us. One nice side note, one of the best friends of Christopher Alexander, Will Wright, the inventor of SimCity and The Sims, where he says that this game is the most perfect melting of code and architecture. It is a part where you would design a whole digital city and then watch the people come and inhabit those cities, and you will look at the human interactions. You will see if you've done your work right, because the people are the scoring system of your neighborhood that you build. You will see if like what you build efficiently meets their needs. It's all about this human interaction at the end of the day. That is what design is. If we're looking at the future of the patterns, if we're looking at a bigger scale, they're all over neighborhoods and over urban design and all over the big software. You can look at it as it is a house, it is a city, it is a static structure, but you see that there's life. For those of you who played Caesar 2, or any other game that was less old than that, the city was burned down, they would build other things. Like a city and applications are not static at all. It's organic, it's almost a living thing itself. So you need to look at those patterns, to look at the designing of the city of the future. We have a lot of challenges before us. We need to look at that circulation. We need to look at the sustainability. We need to look how people in 50, 100 years are going to live and how the interactions are going to be. Looking at the digital world, it's also going hand in hand with those physical architecture. Like everything from mobility has a big impact on that. And we're evolving to those so-called smart cities. Actually, I found that Stockholm won the top prize of the Smart City of 2019 in its mobility successions. So we need to see, and we need to maybe reread a pattern language to look behind the why, to see what we're going to do with all that data. Because right now we have all the data. We can do whatever we want with it. But how are we going to do something with it? How are we going to do something that adds meaning and that really helps people forward? At last, it's really handy to use the analogy in communication. It's when I'm talking about software and application development with other people, and they say like, "Oh, can you build me a website or can you build me a web application?" They have no idea what the cost price is. So usually you can say like, "Okay, yeah, it costs like a small house. You want this big? Oh, it costs like a small mall. That will be that." But also to try and convince people to do user experience design. The importance of having mock-ups. You're not going to build a house without a plan, without some kind of 3D render. You want that at your table. You need this as a communication tool. Also, the agile way of working is also something that is transferred from there. A good one is use it as a tool when you're striving to alleviate the technical debt. Are you going to just make another extension? Are you just going to give Botox to the dinosaur? Or is it time to take the bulldozer and start anew with the new norms? Norms are evolving, and I know a client will not be happy to have a new technical upgrade, but it's like that in buildings as well. Energy efficiency changes every few years, and that is also the way that it's going. I also just want to point out that this is a whole construction team. I'm really sorry for the stock image. It's a lousy, lousy stock image, but it was the best one I could find from a whole team. This is what makes up constructions. So you have architects, you have stability engineers, you have acoustic engineers, you have building physics engineers, you have then people who are actually going to build it with all specialists on that side for electricity, for piping, for fire safety. Yeah, I can keep on going. But so you have all those people and you need them all. And this just to point out that being a full stack developer is a damn hard thing to be, because then you need to be all those people in once. So for big projects, it's perfectly normal to have and to need multiple experts in the field as well. So also this was made by Hannes, one of the Belgians that saw that Belgium was full of very ugly houses. It's a really fun account to follow, to do that. But most of all, I just want to thank you for listening to my story about architecture. I want to thank you for welcoming me also in this warm world of computer science, and for all the chances that I got without a degree in it. Into also this community where I can feel that everybody is so motivated and everybody kind of wants to make this world a better place through technology. Because this is something that I'm thinking of. It's like architectural design, it's fun, and we have made very beautiful buildings, also very ugly ones. But they were all created by licensed people only. Whereas now everyone can design an application and everyone can use it. Poor or rich, everyone has access to the digital world. Both want to make the world a better place. But the IT community does some stuff really well. And where I had this whole talk about what we can learn from architecture, I think we can also reverse the question. Is what can architecture now learn from the computer science world? Thank you very much.